The ancient battlefield still obeyed orders. The first impossible shot crossed Elliot Crane's navigation display before the convoy alarms had finished sounding. A bright line appeared between two tumbling asteroids, cut through the civilian lane, and struck the targeting cluster on the lead raider ship. The raider had been turning toward the last passenger carrier in the convoy. One moment, its weapons were tracking the carrier. The next, its targeting array spun away in a spray of fragments. The carrier continued through the gap, untouched. Elliot stared at the source marker his system had placed on the shot. There was nothing there but darkness and stone. Second contact turning in, Commander June Mercer said over the convoy channel. Her voice remained controlled, but every ship could hear the urgency beneath it. Rear carriers, tighten the lane. Cargo vessels, hold the center. Nobody break formation. Elliot was already moving the navigation guides. 23 civilian ships were threading a narrow route through an ancient asteroid field. The largest freighters occupied the middle. Four passenger carriers held the protected inner line. Elliot's navigation tug flew near the front, marking safe openings before the heavier vessels reached them. To their right hung the wreck that had made the route famous. An Earth warship had broken into two enormous sections 600 years earlier. Its forward half turned slowly above the trade lane, open decks facing stars. The rear half drifted several kilometers away, black and hollow. Every visible weapon on both sections had been cut away, melted, or torn loose during the final battle. The wreck could not fire. A second shot came from below the lane. It passed under Elliot's tug and struck a raider's drive vanes. The hit did not destroy the ship. It forced the raider sideways and broke the angle it needed to trap the convoy between two rocks. Then a third shot emerged from behind a broad asteroid on the far side of the route. It clipped the weapon mount of another raider just as that mount began to charge. Multiple batteries, someone said. Multiple angles, Elliot replied. Same timing. He enlarged the tracks. The shots had arrived from points separated by dozens of kilometers, yet each had performed the same limited task. One broke a target lock. One pushed a ship out of position. One stopped a third raider from firing into the civilian lane. None followed the raiders when they pulled back. The pattern reached into Elliot's memory before the name of it did. Open the road. Protect the civilian center. Do not waste fire on an enemy that is already leaving. He had learned that doctrine years earlier in planetary defense. The equipment had been newer, but the geometry was the same. Commander, keep the convoy on the current line, he said. The fire is opening an exit for us. You know that. I know what the shots are doing. I still do not know who is firing them. The raiders withdrew beyond the broken sight lines of the asteroid field. The unknown guns stopped at once. For several seconds, only damage reports filled the channel. No passenger compartment had lost pressure. No civilian vessel had been hit. One freighter had a damaged radiator, and the rear passenger carrier, the Horizon, had lost part of its steering array. Horizon can continue, its pilot reported. But we cannot make a sharp turn. Give us a wide lane. That meant the convoy could not simply scatter into open space. The Horizon carried more than 800 passengers and now needed the very corridor the invisible weapons had protected. Elliot saved every firing track before the convoy systems cleared the combat layer. Direction, timing, speed, identification burst. The identification code made him look twice. All three rounds carried the registry of the ancient warship. That cannot be right, Mercer said when he sent her the result. The wreck was surveyed 11 months ago. I read the survey. Every gun on it is dead. The shots did not begin near the wreck. Elliot turned his tug toward a sheltered bend in the lane. The convoy followed at reduced speed, using a cluster of large rocks to block most direct fire. He did not ask thousands of people to stop beside a weapon system no one understood. He kept them moving, but slowly enough that he could study what had just saved them. Mercer opened. A private channel. Route protection is coming, she said. Their nearest ships are 40 minutes away. The raiders could return in 10. I want the convoy out of this field. So do I. Horizon cannot make the outer turn without exposing its damaged side. Then we stay together and cross as fast as it can manage. If we leave the line these guns recognize, We may give up the only defense between Horizon and the Raiders. Or we may remain inside the reach of something that decides we are the threat next time. It was a fair concern. Elliot respected enough not to answer immediately. Give me one moving survey window, he said. No live provocation. No weapons test. If I cannot show you a stable rule before Horizon reaches the withdrawal marker, we leave. Mercer studied the convoy map. One window, she said, and you do not risk a civilian ship to prove a theory. Agreed. Elliot sent the projectile data to the technical crews aboard the freighters. The answers returned quickly. The forward half of the wreck had no working launch system. The rear half had no intact fire control bus. The remaining barrels were warped or physically disconnected. More important, the 3 projectiles had begun their flights inside the asteroid field. One came from a rock above the lane, one from below it, the third from behind a tumbling mass that should have contained nothing but iron and ice. Yet all 3 rounds had announced themselves as weapons of the same dead ship. Elliot was still arranging the paths when the wreck transmitted. The signal was weak and narrow, more like a machine reporting a completed checklist than a ship calling for help. Threat displaced, a flat voice said. Civilian passage remains active. 1 crew member remains outside. Protection mission incomplete. No one on the convoy channel spoke. The message repeated once, then ended. Mercer broke the silence. 1 crew member outside what? Elliot looked at the 2 halves of the warship turning in the distance. No suited figure floated nearby. No emergency beacon moved among the rocks. I do not know, he said. But the guns are not the only thing here, still following orders. He compared the first shot with the convoy's emergency transmission. The times matched almost exactly. The hidden weapon had not fired when the Raiders entered the field. It had not fired when they accelerated. It had fired only after a civilian distress code went out and a Raider locked onto a passenger carrier. That changed the problem. The question was no longer whether an ancient battlefield had awakened. The question was what rule it was obeying and who had been left outside for 600 years. Elliot began with the paths of the projectiles. He extended them backward through the movement of the asteroids. The source points did not form a defensive circle around the wreck. They formed overlapping gates along the civilian route. A gun in one rock could protect the convoy only while the ships passed through one section. A gun farther ahead could cover the next section. A third could reach across the gap between them. The arrangement had not been designed to control the whole battlefield. It had been designed to keep one road open. The wreck is not carrying the guns, Elliot told Mercer. It is calling guns that were placed at different corners of the evacuation lane. How many? At least 3 that still work. Probably more that no longer do. And you want to approach one with an unmanned maintenance drone. Passive sensors first. Mercer granted permission with visible reluctance. A drone left the nearest freighter and moved toward the asteroid above the lane. Elliot guided it at walking speed relative to the rock. The asteroid rolled once every 7 minutes, exposing a deep fracture and then hiding it again. The first 2 passes showed only stone. On the third, Elliot matched the drone to the exact line of the first shot. A narrow status pulse appeared beneath the background noise. It vanished whenever the rock turned the wrong face toward the convoy. There, he said. Hold position. The drone sent a low-power diagnostic tone. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a slab of rock slid inward. Dust lifted from a seam that had not moved in centuries. Behind it rested a weapon mount buried deep inside the asteroid. Its barrel was short and heavily shielded. Rails carried. It forward only far enough to clear the stone when it fired. The image spread across the convoy displays. Voices stopped in the middle of reports. The gun did not turn toward the drone. It completed a brief internal check, withdrew, and closed the rock over itself. One of the asteroids is armed, Mercer said. One of them is a hand, Elliot replied. It is not the mind. The local controller stored firing angles, ammunition state, and mechanical limits. It did not decide who was hostile. It received coordinates, checked whether a shot was safe, fired, and closed. The command signal led back toward the broken warship. Elliot requested a direct link to the surviving computer core. Identify command status. Protection mission active. Suspend protection mission. Authority rejected. Transfer control to present route command. Living command officer absent for verification range. Transfer unavailable. Identify the absent officer. One crew member remains outside. Protection mission incomplete. The answer was no clearer than before, but it established one fact. The machine was not searching for a ghost. It believed a living officer still existed beyond the wreck's verification range. It could keep saying that forever, Mercer said. It already has. Then we leave it for route protection. Elliot brought up the firing tracks. Look at what it did not do. One raider crossed behind a passenger carrier after losing its weapon angle. The network had 2 clear shots and did not take either. The raider was no longer threatening the lane. That proves restraint once. We can check the old traffic record without asking it to fire again. The convoy carried 2 centuries of route records. Elliot searched every civilian distress call made near the wreck. Engine failures had never awakened the network. False alarms had produced nothing. The guns had remained silent whenever no attacker threatened the route. Only one old incident matched the present attack. 93 years earlier, a transport had reported an attempted boarding. An unexplained shot disabled the boarding craft, and the firing stopped as soon as the transport escaped. The rule was simple. A civilian ship had to call for help, a direct threat had to be present, and the network acted only long enough to open a way out. It is not defending territory, Elliot said. It is preserving passage. With guns, Mercer replied. With restraint. That distinction may keep 800 people on Horizon alive. Mercer looked toward the damaged carrier on the convoy map. Horizon was moving, but each correction came late and wide. The convoy could not outrun the raiders without leaving it behind. Continue the investigation, she said. But the withdrawal marker stays. Elliot opened the warship's surviving maintenance records. The first useful diagram showed weapon assemblies being removed from the ship before the hull broke apart. Small craft had carried them into the asteroid field. Their final positions matched the gates Elliot had drawn from the shots. The crew had built the network deliberately. The second record was a one-line order. Maintain the civilian evacuation route until command confirms passage complete. The third record defined command. The ship's computer could continue in active order. It could not declare the order completed. It could not transfer weapon authority to an unidentified person. Final authority belonged to the last living captain assigned to the ship. Elliot read the line twice. Living, he said. After 600 years, Mercer asked. Either the computer never received proof of death, or the captain survived. The final emergency log answered only part of that question. During the last hour of the battle, the captain had been placed inside a suspended animation pod. The pod was launched away from the wreck under extreme stealth. It carried the authority required to end the defense mission after the evacuation route was clear. The pod was supposed to return when the fighting stopped. The warship broke in 2 before recovery could begin. Elliot looked at the machine's repeated message. One crew member remains outside. It had never meant someone beyond an airlock. It meant the last command officer had left the ship's verification range and never returned. The wreck was not waiting for a ghost. It was waiting for its captain. Finding the captain should have become easy once Elliot knew what he was looking for. It did not. The launch record contained a direction and speed from 6 centuries earlier. Since then, asteroids had collided, divided, and pulled smaller bodies into new paths. The 2 halves of the warship had moved far from their original positions. The old coordinates now pointed into empty space. The pod had been designed not to be found by enemies. It carried no continuous beacon and produced almost no heat. After launch, it had matched its drift to a broad asteroid and used the rock as cover. It would answer only a command-level scan from the wreck, and even then with a pulse too weak and brief to trace directly. A perfect hiding place, Mercer said. Too perfect. Over 600 years, the Corps had received 11 brief replies from the pod. None gave a usable position. Each was only a blink through a temporary opening as the asteroids moved. Old search teams had chased those apparent positions and found empty space. Elliot used the replies differently. He compared all 11 with the known motion of the buried gun platforms, the only objects the Corps had tracked continuously. Most possible routes failed at once. They crossed solid rock or missed one of the old replies. One route remained. A slow corridor of open space winding between the largest asteroids. If all 11 signals came from the same pod, the captain had been drifting through that corridor for centuries. Probably, Mercer repeated. I cannot promise the pod is there. I can predict the next moment when the wrecks scan and 3 moving gaps should reach that corridor. How long? 17 minutes. After that, the next useful alignment may not come for years. Mercer turned toward the passenger status display. Thousands of people were still inside the convoy. Horizon had begun overheating one of its steering motors from repeated corrections. We now know the network follows a civilian protection rule, she said. We can clear the field and send specialists back. Horizon cannot clear before the raiders return. Then we use the network if they attack. The network still has an unfinished combat mission and no living authority inside range. Even if it saves us today, it will remain here armed and waiting. The raiders already know one battery's position. As if the field had heard him, for new contacts appeared beyond the rocks. The raiders had returned. Their formation had changed. 2 ships moved toward the convoy from outside the known firing angles. The others approached the asteroid where the drone had exposed the first hidden gun. They are not trying to board us, Mercer said. They want the network. The raiders did not need command codes. They had seen where one battery opened. If they broke the stone, removed the mount, and destroyed the Rex core, they could sell the hardware and leave the civilian route undefended. Their first probing shots struck the asteroid around the hidden battery. The mount withdrew deeper. Protective doors moved. Power shifted through the old network. A reserve estimate appeared on Elliot's display. The opening defense had consumed less ammunition than expected, but the machines were failing in other ways. Motors strained inside stone. Several platforms no longer answered. Others could fire only through narrow angles because their rails had weakened. The network could perform one more coordinated defense across the civilian lane. After that, the remaining guns might still move or fire alone, but they could no longer guarantee a continuous escape corridor. Mercer saw the same estimate. We save the final response for the convoy. Yes. Then nobody wakes it for your search. Agreed. I will use the next scan it is already scheduled to send. You are not taking the convoy deeper. No. Keep moving toward the exit. I will take the navigation tug through the alignment. Alone. The gap is too narrow for a large ship. Mercer looked at him for a long moment. Your plan assumes the 11 pulses came from the same object. If they did, only one path fits. And if you are wrong, I reach the withdrawal line and return. If you find it, Elliot checked the ancient pod's mass. Then I become slow. Mercer did not smile. Your tug is not armed. It was built to move heavy cargo through crowded docks. That may be more useful in there. Another raider shot struck the exposed asteroid. The old battery doors flexed but held. The alignment window would open while the raiders were pressing the field. Elliot revised his route. His tug had copied a harmless diagnostic package from the hidden gun. It contained equipment status, mechanical limits, and the old ship registry. It did not contain command authority. To the raiders, however, it could look like a map of the entire network. I can broadcast part of this on an open maintenance channel, he said. They will think I am carrying the technical record. You will make yourself the most valuable target in the field. It pulls some of them away from Horizon and away from the corridor where the pod should appear. I'm not ordering you to do this. Understood. And if the geometry changes outside your limits, you come back without the pod. Elliot knew that promise would be harder to keep than it sounded. Still, he gave it. The convoy maintained formation behind the sheltering rocks. It did not run. It did not stop. It kept moving at the fastest speed Horizon could manage. Elliot separated his tug from the front line and transmitted the first fragment of the diagnostic package. 2 raiders changed course at once. Ahead, 3 large asteroids moved toward the alignment he had calculated. Beyond them, the ancient core began its next command scan. Elliot entered the field alone. The navigation tug was built to push freight through crowded docks, not to outrun raiders through an asteroid field. Elliot used the difference. A combat pilot would have searched for open space and speed. Elliot searched for predictable motion. He moved close to the largest rocks, matched their drift for a few seconds, then crossed behind them when their rotation hid his tug from direct sensors. The raiders were faster, but they could not see through stone. He transmitted another fragment of the diagnostic package. One raider accelerated toward the signal. The other moved wide, trying to reach the far side of the corridor before Elliot did. Elliot ignored both ships and watched the 3 asteroids ahead. Their openings were beginning to overlap. The first gap was a broad valley between 2 iron bodies. The second was a narrow channel formed by a fractured rock. The third remained hidden until the largest asteroid rolled and exposed a dark cut through its center. The ancient core scanned, moved across the field. Elliot shut down every transmitter on the tug except the passive receiver. The cabin became quiet enough for him to hear the circulation fan behind his seat. The first gap aligned. Nothing. The second opened behind it. A faint signal touched the receiver, too weak for direction. Then the third gap turned into place. The signal returned. It lasted less than a second. Elliot marked the exact time. The pod had not announced a location. It had answered because the scan had reached it through all 3 openings. The first raider appeared behind him. A warning tone reported a target lock. Elliot cut sideways around the rotating edge of the fractured asteroid. A raider's shot struck stone where the tug had been. Fragments swept across the hull like hard rain. He did not turn toward the apparent source of the pulse. By the time he reached that point, the pod would have moved. Instead, he compared the delay between the weak contact and the stronger reply. He added the motion of the asteroids and the direction of the core scan. The timing gave him the pod's direction of travel. He flew toward where it would be next. The second raider had understood that he was not simply escaping. It crossed above the corridor and began closing from the side. Elliot released the rest of the false diagnostic package in a tight burst and directed it toward a maintenance buoy he had dropped near the first gap. The lead raider changed course toward the buoy, expecting a data relay. The wider ship stayed with Elliot. A broad asteroid passed between them. Elliot cut power, rotated the tug, and let momentum carry him sideways. When the raider cleared the rock, it searched ahead along his previous line. Elliot was already moving behind it. The predicted point approached. At first, he saw nothing. Then a shape separated from the dust-covered face of a smaller asteroid. It was not attached to the rock. It drifted beside it at nearly the same speed, hidden in its sensor shadow. The pod was dark and coated in centuries of mineral dust. No light marked its windows. No engine glow surrounded it. It looked like wreckage too ordinary to collect. Elliot matched its motion. The pod answered his rescue transponder with one narrow pulse. A medical status appeared on his display. Occupant alive. Suspension stable. External power required for emergency recovery. For one moment, Elliot simply looked at the word alive. Then the raider's sensor beam crossed the pod. He moved the tug between them. The first cargo clamp closed around the pod's ancient lifting frame. The second approached from below, but the pod was rotating slightly faster than the tug. Metal struck metal and slid away. The clamp tried again. A warning flashed. Alignment motor damaged. The raider fired. Elliot pushed the tug downward. The shot missed the cabin, but struck the end of the failed clamp. The arm folded backward and locked against the hull. One clamp held the pod. One was gone. The pod began to swing. Its mass pulled the tug around in a slow, widening turn. The remaining clamp was not designed to carry that load alone. A yellow strain warning turned red. Elliot tried to rotate the tug with the pod, but the damaged arm blocked the angle. If the remaining clamp failed, the pod would drift back into the raider's path. "Convoy, I found the pod," he said. Mercer answered at once. "Occupant, alive. One clamp damaged. I do not have a secure tow. Cut it loose and mark the position. Route protection is 21 minutes away." Elliot looked at the raider, turning back toward him. It will not remain here for 21 minutes. Elliot, I can secure it manually. Outside the tug, the pod has an old rescue collar. I can run a line through it. You have a hostile ship inside firing range. In 30 seconds before the clamp tears free. Mercer did not waste another second arguing. Keep your suit tethered to the tug. I will send approach warnings through your navigation channel. Elliot sealed his helmet and opened the small service lock behind the cockpit. The field became silent. The tug and pod turned together against a background of black stone and distant stars. The remaining clamp groaned through the hull. Elliot pulled himself along the exterior handholds with a rescue line clipped to his suit. The pod swung away. The line between his waist and the tug tightened. He waited until the pod returned, caught the edge of its lifting frame, and locked one glove around a bar buried beneath dust. The surface trembled under him. The raider appeared beyond the curve of the nearby asteroid. Mercer's voice entered his helmet. Target lock forming. 11 seconds. Elliot pulled the rescue cable from his belt and pushed its hook through the pod's collar. The hook struck a layer of hardened dust and stopped. He hit it with the heel of his glove. Nothing. 8 seconds. He scraped the dust away. Beneath it, the collar had folded inward during launch. The cable would not pass through. Elliot looked back at the tug. The damaged clamp arm had locked across the small maneuvering thruster on the port side. That was why the tug could not match the pod's rotation. He had 2 problems and time for one action. 5 seconds, Mercer said. Elliot released the pod and pulled himself toward the damaged arm. The move allowed the pod to swing wider. The remaining clamp alarm became a continuous tone in his helmet. He reached the folded arm, braced both boots against the hull, and pulled the manual release. It did not move. The raider fired. Mercer shouted a direction. Elliot pushed himself flat against the tug. The shot crossed above him and struck the ancient pod. A section of mineral coating burst away. The armor beneath it held. The impact changed the pod's rotation just enough to drag the tug sideways. The damaged arm shifted under the load. Elliot pulled the release again. This time it opened. The broken clamp arm dropped away from the maneuvering thruster and spun into space. Elliot pulled himself through the service lock and sealed the inner hatch. He did not wait to remove his helmet before firing the freed thruster. The tug rolled with the pod. The remaining clamp strain began to fall. He fed a second rescue line through the service lock, matched rotation precisely, and used the tug's small utility arm to guide the hook through the cleared collar. The line tightened across the tug's central towing frame. The pod was secure. The raider came around for another pass. Elliot released a cloud of reflective maintenance foil from the tug's cargo bay. The strips spread between the ships, flashing false edges across the raider's sensors. Its target lock broke for 3 seconds. 3 seconds was enough. Elliot pulled the pod behind the asteroid and disappeared into its shadow. Inside the cockpit, his left glove was torn across the outer layer. The pressure seal beneath it remained intact. He flexed his fingers once and returned both hands to the controls. Tow secure, he reported. Mercer let out a breath he could hear over the channel. Bring it home. Elliot connected emergency power through the rescue line. The pod systems woke in stages. Heat returned first, then internal circulation, then a controlled release of the suspension field. The process would take several minutes. The added mass changed everything. The tug answered each command as if it were dragging a building. Fuel estimates fell, his turning radius widened, and the easiest route back had already closed. Elliot used the buried gun platforms as fixed markers and found one narrow path toward the wreck. It was exposed, and he could survive it only if the network saved its final coordinated defense. Mercer sent an updated map. Horizon had reached the last shelter before open space, but its damaged steering motor was overheating. 8 minutes before Horizon loses steering, she said. Route protection is 14 minutes away. Then the ancient network must open the road for us. It may have enough power for one final response. Elliot studied the convoy route and his own. The same response could cover both, but only after the raiders moved fully into the remaining firing angles. Hold the distress call until I reach the last battery marker, he said. That lets them come close. It also brings the raiders inside the firing angles that protect both roads. A raider emerged behind Elliot. With the pod attached, he could no longer outturn it. He aimed toward the marker for the nearest buried battery. The hostile ship followed, confident that the slow civilian tug had run out of choices. The gun inside the asteroid could not fire without a lawful command. But the rock itself provided cover, and the raider had to expose its targeting cluster to keep a lock around the curve. Elliot passed close enough to see the sealed weapon door beneath the dust. He cut thrust and let the pod's mass pull the tug into a wider arc than the raider expected. The hostile ship crossed directly in front of the buried gun's potential firing line. Elliot did not ask the weapon to shoot. He used its position as a navigation gate, just as the ancient crew had intended. The raider broke its approach rather than remain exposed. That gave Elliot the distance he needed. The pod's medical display changed. Occupant responsive. A weak voice entered the rescue channel. Ship status. Elliot kept his eyes on the route ahead. Your ship is in 2 pieces. The command core still functions. I am towing your pod back to verification range. There was a pause. Time since launch. Elliot had known the question would come. The number still felt too large to say. 600 years. The channel remained silent for several seconds. The medical system warned Elliot not to overload the occupant with information. There was no time for history anyway. A civilian convoy is under attack, Elliot continued. Your defense network is still protecting the evacuation route. It has one coordinated response left. The computer cannot transfer or end the mission without you in direct verification range. Crew, Elliot gave the shortest honest answer. No other living crew has been found. The captain inhaled slowly. Name and assignment. Elliot Crane, pilot of the civilian navigation tug. Then navigate, Mr. Crane. Report when command link is available. Grief tightened the captain's voice, but he did not turn it into a speech. He understood the immediate problem and placed it first. Ahead, the safe line narrowed between 2 moving rocks. The tug could pass. The tug and pod together would clear it by less than a meter on either side. A raider moved to block the far end. At the same time, 2 ships near. The convoy exposed their weapons and drove toward the civilian formation. Mercer moved the freighters outward to shield horizon, but the convoy had no more shelter beyond the final asteroid. Elliot, she said, we are at the last turn. He looked at both routes. The convoy needed a corridor toward open space. He needed a corridor toward the wreck. The ancient network could create both only if its remaining guns fired as one system. Begin the distress renewal when I reach the last battery marker, he said. Not before. Your marker is 90 seconds away. Horizon's motor may not last that long. If you call now, the guns will fire at the first clear threats and spin the defense before the other raiders enter range. Mercer looked at the temperature climbing inside Horizon's steering assembly. I will hold for the marker. Elliot aimed the tug at the narrow gap. The raider ahead fired. The shot passed over the tug and struck the edge of the opening. Stone fragments filled the route. Elliot could not dodge sharply with the pod attached. He reduced thrust instead, letting the largest pieces cross ahead, then accelerated into the space behind them. Smaller fragments struck the hull. One cut through the outer cooling loop. A temperature warning appeared. The tug could keep moving, but not for long. The gap closed around him. He aligned the tug with the long axis of the pod and adjusted by centimeters, using the rotating rock on his left as a moving wall. The raider expected him to slow further and turn to maintain its firing angle. That placed it between 2 buried batteries with its targeting cluster exposed to both. The tug cleared the gap. The last battery marker appeared on Elliot's display. Now, Mercer transmitted a renewed civilian distress call. The wreck answered instantly. Civilian threat confirmed. Final coordinated protection available. Living command officer approaching verification range. Across the field, stone began to move. One asteroid opened along a seam and extended a barrel into the dark. Another rotated an armored plate away from a hidden launcher. Then another opened, and another, until points Elliot had believed were dead rock became parts of one vast formation. The network waited until every firing line was clear. Elliot transmitted his navigation solution to the core. The machine did not give him control. It accepted the civilian exit and towing route as protected passages because both served the active rescue mission. The raider blocking Elliot locked its weapons. Two buried guns fired from different directions. One round struck the raider's targeting cluster. The other disabled a maneuvering vane. The ship spun away but remained intact. Farther out, the final defense unfolded across the convoy lane. Shots cut target locks aimed at passenger carriers. Other rounds struck drive systems on ships, trying to close the exit. None followed a raider that turned away. None crossed the civilian line. Mercer's freighters moved first, shielding the wide, turn horizon needed. The passenger carriers passed through the center. Horizon's damaged motor reached its shutdown limit just as the ship cleared the final rock. Its steering went dark. Two freighters attached emergency lines and pulled it toward open space. The last civilian ship left the field. The network shifted its remaining angles toward Elliot. A raider behind the tug tried one final approach. Elliot led it across the face of the nearest buried mount. A single shot broke its forward sensor array. The raider abandoned the chase. Then the guns fell silent. Reserve indicators across the network dropped to minimum survival levels. Several batteries closed and did not answer again. The final defense had been spent. Elliot still had to reach the wreck. His tug was low on fuel. The damaged cooling loop was approaching its limit. Every correction required more power because of the pod. The forward half of the warship turned slowly ahead, its broken decks forming a dark wall across the stars. The command core sent a verification beam. Range insufficient. Elliot guided the tug past the first hull fragment. Range insufficient. The captain's camera showed the wreck inside the pod. He looked at the two halves without speaking. Elliot matched the rotation of the forward section and moved the pod toward the narrow volume the core could scan directly. A red warning filled his display. Cooling failure imminent. The tug's safety system prepared to shut down the main drive. "Mr. Crane," the captain said, "release the pod and withdraw. My thrusters may carry me into range." Elliot checked the pod's ancient maneuvering reserve. "Your thrusters have not fired in 6 centuries. Your ship is failing now. The core needs you alive and verified. It does not need my tug undamaged." He disabled the automatic drive shutdown. Heat rose through the cockpit floor. The tug crossed the first verification boundary. "Living command officer signal detected," the computer said. "Biometric confirmation incomplete." The captain placed one hand on the pod scanner. The signal flickered. Dust and battle damage covered part of the pod's external identity array. The core could detect a living body, but could not confirm the captain's authority. "Move closer," the computer said. Elliot had almost no maneuvering reserve left. The wreck's forward section rotated between him and the cleanest approach. A broken armor plate projected from the hull like a wall. With the pod attached, the tug could not pass around it before the cooling system failed. He looked at the route markers he had used throughout the field. One buried battery near the wreck still reported the exact motion of its asteroid, though it had no firing reserve. The rock was about to pass beneath the broken plate. As the wreck rotated and the asteroid crossed below it, a narrow passage would open for only a few seconds. Elliot turned toward it. "That line ends at the hull," Mercer warned from beyond the field. "Only if I fly where the hull is now." He reduced thrust and let the pod's momentum swing the tug toward the asteroid's moving shadow. The wreck rotated above them. The gap opened. Elliot fired the last safe burst from the tug. The pod passed beneath the broken armor plate with less than a meter to spare. The second verification beam crossed it. Biometric identity confirmed. Cognitive response required. The captain raised his hand toward the pod controls. "State mission," the computer said. "Maintain the civilian evacuation route until command confirms passage complete." "Current condition?" The captain looked through the camera at the convoy, moving beyond the field. "Civilian passage complete. Immediate threat displaced." One crew member returned to verification range. For the first time in 600 years, The machine did not report that someone remained outside. The captain closed his eyes briefly, then opened them. Show command options. Two choices appeared. The first preserved the surviving core and the remaining power inside the gun platforms. The network would continue waiting for authorized recovery. Limited local weapons might still respond, but the old combat authority would remain active. The second ended the ancient order, locked every automatic weapon, and transferred the site to present route protection. The remaining power would close damaged weapon doors, separate ammunition feeds, and light the civilian exit. The captain studied both choices. Can the first option reliably protect another convoy? He asked. Coordinated protection unavailable. Mission reliability below required standard. Then preserving command, preserve a name, not the purpose. Elliot did not answer. The decision belonged to the person whose crew had built the network and whose absence had kept it alive. The captain looked at the broken warship. My crew placed those guns so civilians could leave, he said. Not so our war could remain in charge after everyone who understood it was gone. He selected the transfer option. Before termination, the computer said, assign final disposition of remaining reserve. The captain could have kept enough power to preserve the command core until recovery arrived. Instead, he directed the reserve toward damaged weapon doors, ammunition locks, and navigation markers. He gave the battlefield one final task that did not involve firing. Protect the living route, he said. Then, in the mission, route protection ships entered communication range as the transfer began. The captain gave them custodial authority over the site and transmitted the positions of every known platform. Automatic firing authority was removed. The old protection rule remained in the archive as a design principle, not as an order. The battlefield could continue carrying out by itself. Across the field, mechanisms followed the shutdown sequence. Weapon doors closed. Ammunition feeds separated from firing chambers. Platforms with enough power turned their barrels away from the trade lane and locked them in place. Navigation lights appeared at the edge of the safe corridor. The route protection commander acknowledged each restriction. Any future decision about the batteries would require present authority and someone living who could answer for it. Only then did the captain give the final report. The missing crew member has returned. Civilian passage is complete. The site is under present-day control. All conditions confirmed, the computer answered. The captain rested his hand on the control. End protection mission. Lock all firing authority. The computer paused for less than a second. Protection mission complete. Firing authority locked. The words carried no emotion. The Corps simply completed the order it had been unable to close for 6 centuries. Then its long-range command signal ended. Elliot watched the network disappear from his navigation display, one platform at a time. The asteroids remained where they had always been, turning slowly through the dark. Nothing about them looked different once the doors were shut. At the center of the wreck's final status display, every warning went dark. One line remained. Mission complete. Elliot's main drive shut down at last. For several seconds, the tug and pod drifted beside the broken warship without power. The cockpit was hot. The fuel reserve was nearly empty, and one side of the hull carried fresh damage. Then a route protection recovery craft reached them and attached a towing line. Mercer called from beyond the field. All civilian vessels are clear. Horizon is under tow. No pressure loss and no serious injuries. Elliot leaned back against his seat. Good. Your decision to stay was justified, she said. It was not a ceremony or a speech. Elliot preferred it that way. Your decision to hold the final distress call gave us both roads, he replied. The captain heard the exchange through the pod channel. This is still a civilian route, he asked. Every day, Elliot said. The captain looked at the navigation lights appearing along the field his crew had once defended. Then the mission lasted longer than the war. It did. Too long. A recovery craft took the pod's weight, and the damaged tug began moving away from the wreck. Behind them, the platforms that still had power sealed themselves beneath stone. The ones that had spent everything remained open for present-day teams to secure. No gun tracked the departing ships. No old command searched for an enemy. The two halves of the warship continued their slow, separate rotation. They did not reconnect. They did not return to life. Only the final order had remained. Elliot opened the first map he had saved after the attack. 3 firing lines crossed the civilian lane and pointed backward into empty-looking rock. At the time, they had seemed like evidence that something impossible had happened. Now they looked like the last visible strokes of a rescue plan drawn 600 years earlier. The convoy continued toward open space. Route protection entered the field behind it. The captain left his ancient battlefield, not to restart the command he had lost, but to place its remains under the care of people who lived in the present. And for the first time in 600 years, the battlefield no longer waited for another order. If this mystery kept you listening, please like the video, share it with another science fiction fan, and subscribe for the next story.